Mcintyre. I'm going to be your tour guide today, and I work for the GUSRC Historical Tours. So, quick health and safety disclaimer: you guys are welcome to use masks if you want to, but if not, just please try to stay away 2 meters away from anyone that's not from your household at all times, especially as we make our way from one stop to the other. So we'll start with a brief historical background of the University of Glasgow. Now, the University of Glasgow is the second oldest university in Scotland and the fourth oldest in the English-speaking world. They come after Oxford, Cambridge and St Andrews. We were founded in 1451 by Bishop Turnbull and King James II. The both of them petitioned to the Pope, who at the time was Nicholas V, to be able to set up a university, because back then you needed the Church's permission to grant degrees that were valid. So we got his permission, and we started off with 24 students in the Glasgow Cathedral in the city centre. Has anyone been to the Glasgow Cathedral? Yes? Not? Perfect. So you have a mental picture of it in your brain. That's where we started off, 24 students. However, we grew up quite fast, so within 9 years we had way too many students to fit. So we were in the city centre, but Glasgow in the 19th century was very much an industrial place, so it was full of factories. There was a lot of smoke, pollution, disease, many people crammed into small spaces. Not ideal for students. So the university decided to move to a much healthier place, and that's when in 1870 we moved here to Gilmerhill, and that's where we've been since. So this building is actually an 1870 building, even though it doesn't look like it, and we'll get into why later in the tour. So are there any questions so far? Great! So we're going to move to our next stop. So right now we're across from the Mcintyre Building, and this building is actually a little bit newer than the main building. So it was built in the 20th century, in the early 20th century. It was originally paid for by John Mcintyre, which is why it's called the Mcintyre Building, and it originally was called John Mcintyre Building, but a few years ago we changed its name to Mcintyre Building to honour both John Mcintyre and his wife Anne Mcintyre. In fact, if after the tour you guys pass by the main street and you look up, you'll be able to see two monograms on the facade. We have AM for Anne Mcintyre and JM for John Mcintyre. Originally this was the men's union, so it's where the men would come after class or in between classes to socialise and to host debates from the debating society. So you have to imagine quite a small building, lots of men, most of them smoking cigars, debating very intensely, very passionately, very sweaty. Not a lot of ventilation going on. So a few years later we called the architect who did the building, who was John James Burnett, and we asked him to please add a ventilation system to help aerate things a bit. So if you look up, you'll see an odd grey spiky structure on the ceiling. It looks almost like it doesn't really belong in there. That is the ventilation system that was added later on in the 1910s. So in 1917, the men's union just became way too big to fit here. Sorry, in 1930, the men's union became way too big to fit here comfortably. So they moved all the way down the University Avenue to Glasgow University Union, much bigger building. And this became, for the first time ever in the history of the University of Glasgow, the women's union. So the women redid the inside of the building a little bit. They included some more tea rooms, they got rid of all of the smoke stains that were on the walls, and they stayed here from 1930 until 1960. Similarly to what happened to the men's union, the women's union just became way too big to fit in here comfortably, so they moved all the way across campus to what is currently Queen Margaret Union, which is this grey concrete looking building in University Gardens. Now this is the SRC now, the Student Representative Council, which just makes sure that students have a voice within the university, that they know their rights, and that they have someone to help them. Are there any questions so far? No? Yes? Is the ventilation system still working? That's a very good question actually that I do not know the answer of. I suppose so. I think it's just this building was designed by a London-based architect called George Gilbert Scott, and because he was from London, there was a bit of tension with Scottish architects who thought maybe, you know, one of them should have designed this very emblematic building, very, very important for the city of Glasgow. But George Kelvins did a magnificent job. He actually took inspiration from the Glasgow Cathedral, and that's why he made the building in neo-Gothic style. You can tell that by the pointed arches of the windows, clover-leaf handles on the windows, the towers, the spires, everything sort of going up into the sky. Now, he also wanted the building to look like it had always been here, like it belonged here. So he used some very clever tricks. First of all, he reused most of the stone from the original building in the city centre. And this is blonde sandstone, and it's a very, very porous material, which just basically means that it soaks up everything that's in the air, all of the pollution. As I was saying earlier, Glasgow was a heavily polluted place in the 19th century. So it has been soaking pollution for 500 years. And that's why you can see some of the stones, especially towards that end, are a bit blacker and grayer. We've got a mix of them. It's kind of like a patchwork, because they also mix them in with newer blonde sandstone. And we will see this better when we go to the south side, but the contrast brings a lot of life to the building. Now, George Kelvins unfortunately died halfway through the construction of the building, so he didn't get to see it finished, and he didn't get to supervise some of the most iconic parts. But his son, John Aldred Scott, got to, and we'll talk about that in a little bit when we get to those stops. There's only 12 buildings because there were only 12 heads of subjects, and there were only 12 subjects. Now, the ancient subjects were something along the lines of Latin, maths, theology, natural philosophy, lots of stuff along those lines. And professors were allowed to live here with their families if they had them. Now, the families had this pastoral role, by which if you were a student here in 1970, you could come and knock on the door of your favourite professor, and their wives would let you in, make you a cup of tea, give you some biscuits, talk to you, see how everything was going. A bit like counselling services before they were a thing in university. Made it feel very homey. Now, professors no longer live here anymore. This is just office space and teaching space, and over there is the theology department, and over here we've got the law department as well as all the offices. But there is one person that is still allowed to live in this square. That is the principal. So we have principal's lodgings just over there. Is the building at the end of the square. Now, Mcintyre, our current principal, he does not live here, but it is in his contract. So if our next principal wishes to live here, they can. There you go. So if you want to live here, become the principal of the University of Glasgow. Easy peasy. So if you look around, you guys, all of the street furniture that you can see, that's all original from 1870. So the fences, the lampposts, all original. We repaint it every year with the colours of the university, which are gold and black. And we also have two pieces of street furniture that we no longer really use, but we have still preserved them to keep the feel of the street. Now we have these over here. Can anyone tell me what they are? Great guess, not quite. Any other guesses? I'll give you a clue. We have one right across from every building, from every house.
Like a label of the professor's name?
Okay, cool. Nice. That's actually a very nice one. Never heard that one. Not quite. They're actually coal hatches. They're covering up the coal cellar, and that was for coal delivery people to just come, dump all the coal that they needed, that the people would need, and then the maids and the people who worked for the families that lived here would come up the service stair, which is why we've got two stairs, the main one and the service one, and just lift up the hatch, grab however much coal they needed, and then you're sorted for the day. You're nice and warm and cozy. So the last thing we have that we still keep are these steps over here. Now, can anyone tell me what these steps are for? I don't know if you guys get to see them very So they are for people to go in and out of carriages. You would have to imagine the carriage pulling up here, and they're quite high, so you don't want to just like randomly fall off. And this makes it so much more accessible to come in and out. Added bonus though, it keeps you from stepping straight into the gutter. And today, surprisingly dry. Often they are quite muddy, and if you're a professor or really anyone, you don't want to get to your class or important appointments with muddy shoes. So there you go. Are there any questions so far, guys? Cool, so now we're going to see a very nice house at the end of the road. Okay, so right now we are in front of Lord Kelvin's house, and he is a very famous physicist. Do you all know who he is? Yes? No? Perfect. Great. So Lord Kelvin, very famous physicist, actually is from Belfast, not from Glasgow. He moved here with his father and his brother at the age of 8, and he actually has a record for being both the youngest and the oldest person to ever be enrolled in this university. So he first came here when he was 10 years old, and then after he retired, he re-enrolled at the age of 75. So yeah, pretty cool man. He was very intelligent. He wrote over 600 papers throughout his lifetime and patented over 62 inventions, but he was not a very good professor. Now, you'd think that someone who became a professor at the age of 22 would have amazing communication skills, would just be like very, very good at it, but he just wasn't. So whenever he delivered a lecture, his students would often stomp their feet during his classes to just show that they didn't understand what was going on, they didn't like the way the lecture was being delivered, just nothing was going right. And Lord Kelvin didn't get it. So students often decided to ramp up, and they would stand where you're standing and throw eggs at his window, his study window, which is the second one over there. Eventually he got the message, and he got his assistant to deliver the lectures for him. Everyone was happy. Students understood what was going on. They got physics, well, natural philosophy is how it was called back then, and he got to work on his papers and his inventions. So happy ever after. So what makes this house so fascinating as well is that it is the first house in Scotland to be fully powered by electricity. He laid the cables himself, and he also helped to bring electricity to the main campus of the university. Very, very cool man. Are there any questions so far before we move on to our next stop? Cool. So as we make our way, I will just point out that red post box over there, which we can look at when we're passing by. It is actually one of the few Victorian post boxes left in Glasgow, and it has the VR for Victoria Regina in it. It's fully functional, so if you have any mail you want to send, you get to do it for here and say that it was mailed from a Victorian post box. Not everyone gets to say that. So also, right before we go, just to point out the Memorial Chapel, that is where we're going. I want you guys to take in everything from the spire to the walls, everything, because I'm going to ask you something before we get there. So right now we are in front of the Memorial Chapel, but this wasn't actually always here. So the Memorial Chapel was added in the early 20th century. And in fact, if you look to the side of the building, you can see that the towers are a slightly different color from when the Memorial Chapel begins. I don't know if anyone can spot that or not, but we have a slightly different color thing going on. That's because the chapel was added by John James Burnett, the same architect that did the Mcintyre Building. It was added in the 1910s. So the chapel was supposed to be finished by 1914, but World War I happened, so they couldn't finish it until 929. And when they did, they chose to turn it into a memorial chapel to commemorate the members of staff and students that died during the war. That's also why we have the In Remembrance inscription just over here. And after World War II, we just added the dates to the inscription. And that's also why we have the pelican underneath the windows. Can anyone spot, can you all see the pelican quite well? Mm-hmm. So the pelican is actually recreating a natural pelican situation that happens whenever a mother pelican is in the wild and she has no food to give to her children. She'll often peck her chest to draw blood and then use that blood to feed her children. So she literally gives her life for the life of her children. And that is what we're commemorating in the engraving. So the reason for that is that it's the international symbol of self-sacrifice. It's quite gruesome, but it's actually pretty beautiful when you think about it and what it stands for. In fact, if you were to go into the chapel and you were to go into the altar, you'd see a series of names engraved in gold letters. Those are the names of the members of staff and students that died during World War I and World War II. So this chapel is still fully functional. It's interfaith, it's non-denominational, and fun fact, if you're a student here, alumni or a member of staff, or even the children of either, you could get married here as well if you wanted to. Gay marriages have been happening since 2014, I think, and we've got a wide variety of chaplains and faiths. So yeah, there you go. Are there any questions so far?
Where did the statues go?
Oh, that's actually a great question. Love that you asked that, because there were actually never any statues meant to be here. So the reason that John James Burnett included this is that he wanted to match the rest of the building. But George Gilbert Scott made the conscious choice to include them without any statues so that it would look like the building had been around during the Reformation. Because in the Reformation, what they did is that they went around and they took down all of the religious imagery from buildings such as universities and things like this that often used to have your little nice religious like statues just over there. They're like roundabout statue size as well. So they went around, they took them down, and they cut all of that. So George Gilbert Scott thought, you know, if I want to make the building look older, I'll just pretend that during the Reformation someone came over and took the statues down. Very clever design. Are there any other questions? Cool. So now I have a question for you guys. Did you look at the spire earlier? I don't know if you can see it very well from here, but did you guys get a good look at the spire earlier? What did it remind you?
The ventilation system?
Yes, great. So that is because John James Burnett was working on the chapel when he was asked to add the ventilation system. And he tried to create that resemblance in between the only two pieces of architecture that were designed by him in the main campus. So there you go. Well spotted. Good. So we can move on to our next one. So this staircase was built in 1690 and it was part of the main building in the city centre. It was actually brought here because George Gilbert Scott thought it was a shame to lose such a beautiful staircase that had so much history. So he decided to chop it off into pieces, and you can actually see the cuts alongside the stair. And he had a stone mason called Alexander Campbell bring it over. So William Riddle was the original architect behind the staircase, and he engraved his name in 1690 on this side, which we can't really see anymore because time. But Alexander Campbell thought it would be a good idea to commemorate what he'd done for the staircase as well, so he added his name to the other side of the staircase. Now, the reason that we have a lion and a unicorn is that the unicorn represents the Kingdom of Scotland and the lion represents the Kingdom of England. So they were both coming together, being nice and friendly to each other. And as you can see, the unicorn has gotten some love. That's because we have a myth going around that the staircase actually are magical. And because they've been around for so long and so many intelligent people have stepped on them, there's this weird magical osmosis process that if you step on the stairs, all of the intelligence from, you know, Lord Kelvin and Adam Smith will seep into you by this magical osmosis process, and you will have very good luck in your exams and just overall be very intelligent in the rest of your life. So much so that Einstein came here and he actually said he wouldn't leave until he stepped on the stairs. He did. There's a picture of him standing here somewhere in the internet, so you can look for it. But the other part of the myth is that if you pet the unicorn, you also get good luck. So people have been giving the unicorn a bit too much love. So please don't give the unicorn love. It's fine the way it is. But if you want to step on the stairs, or even just touch the stairs and try to get some of Adam Smith and Lord Kelvin's, and maybe even Einstein's intelligence in, be my guest when you come over to the university. Are there any questions so far? Lovely, so we can go to our next stop, which is the south side. We can talk a bit more about So Glasgow also hosts Glasgow Festival every November, and in February for LGBTQ+ History Month, we have representatives from the university, the SRC, and the different unions come here and set up the flag, the LGBTQ+ flag, in the flagpole behind you guys. So to shift the attention back to the south side of the main building, we have the bell tower, which is one of the most iconic elements of the University of Glasgow, with its huge stone spire. And this is actually one of the features that John Aldred Scott, George Gilbert Scott's son, was in charge of doing. Now, George Gilbert Scott originally wanted this to be a clock tower, but if you look up, you'll notice that there's not a clock up there. And also that if there were, you'd have to crane your neck up so high that it would just be uncomfortable and honestly just not very nice either. So John Aldred Scott thought, you know, my dad's designs were good, but this just needs to be revamped. And he turned it into a bell tower. He added the stone spire at the top, which was originally supposed to be made out of wood. Thankfully he changed his mind, made it out of stone in the end. And he also added 3 crests alongside the facade. So on top of the first set of windows, we have the coat of arms of the University of Glasgow. I don't know if everyone can spot it over there. You have to have eagle eyes. It's quite small. So if you can't see it very well, I'll just walk you through the components of it. So we have the Book of Learning, or the Bible, depending on who interprets it, on the top. And that is because we are an institution of higher learning, and because we first started off and were co-funded by a bishop and started off in the cathedral. So right underneath it, we have the university mace, which is a stick round about this high, made of gold and ivory. It was made for us in Paris in the 1490s, and it's basically just a symbol of distinction and power. So we still use it. We have the original one. So it is in the Hunterian Museum, but we do take it out whenever we have important ceremonies, such as graduations. In fact, the mace bearer is a person who starts and finishes the graduation by walking in and out of the hall. So around it we have the miracles of St. Mungo, and a quick way for you to remember them is this little riddle, which goes: the bird that never flew, the tree that never grew, the fish that never swam, and the bell that never rang. And these are all related to the 4 miracles that St. Mungo did in his life. Now, St. Mungo was the founder of the city of Glasgow, allegedly. And you may have seen these 4 miracles around. They are drawn into bus stops, and they are also like in the cathedral and just everywhere else around the city, because they are part of Glasgow City's coat of arms. Now, every little drawing has a story and a myth, and I definitely advise you guys to like Google them, because some of them, particularly the fish one, are very, very funny. So we also have another 2 crests on the main door, so on either side. On this side over here we have the crest representing Bishop Turnbull, who was the first Chancellor of the University as well as being its co-founder. And John Aldred Scott, he was very much into hunts, which is why the crest is actually a bull with its head turned to the side, because Turnbull. So yeah. And on the other side we have the coat of arms of the Chancellor of the University in 1870, which is Duke of Monroe's, much less exciting than the bull, is just 3 seashells. But it was a way for John Aldred Scott to bring together the past and the present of the university in a moment as important as basically grabbing the entire campus and moving it across the city. Are there any questions so far? Cool, so we can go inside and talk a little bit more about the donated the equivalent of today's £3 million to be able to build a magnificent hall. So the university went all out all around. So we ran out of money halfway through. And we were able to get from that tower to this tower over there. That is more or less what the butte hole was. But we had a little bit of a hole situation happening between the tower and the butte hole. So this section right across from us, that did not exist. Just big gaping hole. So a few years after that, this very wealthy shipbuilder called Charles Randall, he donated the equivalent of £5 million of today's money to be able to build the hole. And we were able to build it. So the reason that such a small area was so expensive is that it was very narrow but long. So we had to get a lot of specialized equipment, engineers, and very, very specific things. Now, inside, the butte hole and the Randolph hole are connected, separated by an archway. It is beautiful. Definitely recommend checking it out in the internet. There's lots of pictures everywhere, so do give it a check. And the other thing that we were not able to pay for, that we also had to ask for external money for, was the cloisters, which are our next stop. So if there's no questions, we're just going to head there now. Quick disclaimer, we have a lot of superstitions going around, but one of them is that if you step on the grass, you will not graduate. So whether that is true or not, I don't know. I stayed out of it for 4 years, so whatever you guys want to do, just quick disclaimer as we make our way there. Originally didn't have enough money to pay for them, so we turned to the city of Glasgow and we asked, hey, can you spot us a bit? And citizens started donating however much they could, a little bit at a time, and in what I can only describe as the first GoFundMe of history in Glasgow at least. So yeah, a little bit at a time, and they managed to pay for all of it, and that's why we always make sure that we have at least one point of access open to the cloister, so that people can come here regardless of whether they're students or not, and regardless of the time of day or the time of the week. In fact, during the weekend, during Christmas time, we also put up fairy lights all around. This is a huge spot for wedding photo shoots, for dissertation photo shoots, and it's also where we have part of the graduation celebration. So very, very busy spot, also very, very beautiful spot. Are there any questions so far before we move on to our next stop? Okay, so right now we are in the staircase that leads to the butte hall and the Hunterian Museum. So the Hunterian Museum owes its name to the Hunter brothers. The Hunter brothers, William and John, were from south of Glasgow, just very close to Glasgow, and they were both anatomists. So out of the two of them, William was the only one that was actually related to the university. So he came here to study theology, but after he finished his degree, he realized that was not really his thing. So he moved to London, and he started to audit different operations and surgeries, and he started just picking up stuff and learning. So he ended up eventually becoming the first male midwife in Britain. He picked up a lot of stuff. So he became so famous that he was the midwife of Queen Charlotte, the wife of King Charles III. He helped in the birth of all of her children but one, the last one, which actually died. So that shows you, died during childbirth. That shows you how good he was at his job at keeping his patients alive, which is kind of hopeful. So his brother John, he was an anatomist, and he also moved to London with William. They learned together, and between the two of them, they dissected around 2,000 human bodies, which is even more impressive when you consider it was illegal back then. They had to actually bring the corpses from the cemeteries, so they used to steal them at night. And sometimes in Victorian cemeteries, you still see cages over some of the tombs That is not because they want to keep the dead from escaping, that is because they want to keep the living from stealing the bodies, which is quite intense. So William and John, they were both huge collectors, and they both had this insane box collections, painting collections from all over the place, several different styles, coins from all over the world, and medical preparations. So lots of fascinating things preserved in jars. And they actually got into a bit of a fight towards the end of their life, which led them to have this competition to see which one managed to have the biggest collection. In the end, William passed before John, and when he did, he bequeathed everything from his entire collection to the University of Glasgow. He also gave us £8,000 to be able to set up a museum to exhibit this collection in. And in 1803, the Huntington Museum became the first free museum in Scotland, which doesn't sound like a lot because now most museums are free, but back then it represented so much for people of Glasgow who then had access for free to all of this knowledge. It was amazing. So the museum took 20 years to be built, and in this time John also passed. So his last wish was that half of his collection, his own personal collection, had to be located in the Huntington Museum, so that a part of him would always be with his brother, because they died when they were mad at each other, and he never really got over that. Yeah. Are there any questions about the Hunter brothers or the Huntington? So if you guys are interested in visiting, it is bookings only right now because of COVID-19, but they also have free tours which are very cool.
We'll go on to our next.
Oh yeah, I forgot, sorry. Sorry. So if you guys want, we can just go to our next stop. Right now we are in front of the Pierce Lodge, which is actually also part of the original building in the city centre. It was the main door back when we were down there, and we cut it out and brought it over in 1870. In fact, you can see the cuts on the sides of the walls. We also brought not just the gateway, but we also brought the crest on the top, the two decoration urns also at the top. If you look up all the way up to the building, the three chimneys, they're also inspired in the way the original main door used to look like. Same thing goes for here on the side, this corbel decoration is also brought over. Now as you can see, the coat of arms has gotten some love recently. We have replated it, have redone it, to get it a bit closer to what it used to look like. Now this is the Pierce Lodge. It was paid for by William Pierce, and it is originally was the naval school. That's why they decided to integrate the main door here. But with time we have dropped that section of the university, and this has just turned into office spaces that people have forgotten about the history of the university and the main door. So do you have any questions so far? Cool, let's go to our next stop, just up the road. Okay, so right now we are by the Memorial Gates, and these were actually a gift given to us by the University of Glasgow alumni for our 500th anniversary. So you can see the foundation date 1451 and the 500th anniversary date 1951 just in the columns by the gates. So what makes these gates so special is that they have the names of the most influential members of staff and students that have gone on to do great things for Glasgow, for Scotland and for the world in general. So we have Bishop Turnbull and King James II at the bottom, the co-founders of the university, and then the rows go up century by century all the way up to the 19th century. Now what happens is that we've had very influential people after the 20th century, so we have two anachronic names. We have John Smith and we have Donald Dewar. So John Smith was key in the creation of a Scottish Parliament in the 1990s, and he would have been the first First Minister of Scotland had he not unfortunately passed away. And Donald Dewar was in fact the first First Minister of Scotland. They were both students at the University of Glasgow. So the other names that we have in the gates that are teaching logics. He was Chancellor at another given point in time. So we really like him here. He's got a building named after him, a statue, a library. He's got a lot of stuff named after him. Now we also have Joseph Lester on top of Adam Smith. Joseph Lester was teaching medicine here with us at the Royal Infirmary when he introduced the use of antiseptics in surgical procedures and managed to save a lot of people's lives. And across from Lester we have James Watt, who was working as an instrument maker when the university had a model of a steam engine. So the steam engine kept on breaking and breaking and breaking, and James Watt was always in charge of repairing it. He ended up getting tired of having to fix something just for it to break instantly. So he ended up modifying it a little bit, just enough so it wouldn't break as much, and that ended up powering up the Industrial Revolution. So there you go. Now the last name on the gate, and also the only female name on the gate as of now, is Isabella Elder. She was married to John Elder, and I know that starting a story about a woman by saying she was married to is not great, but it gets better. So she's married to John Elder, who unfortunately passed away. And John Elder co-owned a shipbuilding company with Charles Randolph. Isabella then did something highly unusual for a woman at the time. She took over the business, and she was a damn good businesswoman. She made a lot of money. She was even better than John and Charles, and ended up selling the company after a few years, making even more money. She had all of this money that she just decided to use to do good things for the city of Glasgow. So she started by building parks such as Elder Park in Govan. And then she decided to step it up. She was like, women need to have access to higher education. So she funded the Queen Margaret College just behind the Botanic Gardens so that women could have access to higher education. And in the 1870s, when the university moved here, they ended up merging with the Queen Margaret College, allowing women to come to study here. But they could not get degrees. So you could put in all the work, you could go to the lectures, you could not get a degree to prove that you had. So Isabella, she was giving the university a lot of money at the time. She heavily disliked this, and she ended up giving the university a sort of ultimatum. It's like, cool, if you want my money, you're gonna have to start giving women degrees. So she stopped paying, and that worked. In 1892, Marian Lucas was the first woman to graduate with a medical degree from the University of Glasgow. So there you go. And as luck would have it, people say that she was the doctor who signed Isabella Elder's death certificate. And she's the one who puts an end to the tour. So if you guys have any questions, now's the time. Are there any questions? No? Perfect. So it was lovely to show you guys around the historical tour of the University of Glasgow.